Hello there, product people. Welcome to the show that supercharges your abilities to become better thinkers, makers, and leaders. I'm your host, Alsawi, and I'm thrilled to have you join me for this exciting episode of Product People. Each week, I'll be chatting with an industry expert, a product leader, a design being, or a change maker who solve meaningful problems for the people they serve. Alternatively, I'll be speaking about a topic on my own and diving deep into it. Some of the episodes will be part of a series on a specific theme, and some episodes are standalone. I'm truly excited for the journey ahead, and I hope you are too. In this episode, we'll be exploring an intriguing organizational social pattern that I call the consultant's wisdom. It's a phenomenon in the corporate wilderness where ideas from internal employees often get disregarded, only to be implemented when those very same ideas are presented by external consultants. So whether you're an employee, a consultant, or simply someone curious about organizational psychology and understanding human behavior, you're in the right place. Expect an honest conversation, valuable insights, and meaningful advice that can fuel your own journey with product, design, and leadership. Let's dive right in. Today we have a very special guest who's a design practitioner, author, and public servant. Joining us on this episode is Noah Fang, a true change maker in the world of design and organizational transformation. He's currently a senior advisor on business transformation. Noah's truly unique background through his past roles include being a business strategist, a documentary writer, a creative director, a user experience manager, an experience designer, a product manager, an editor, a graphic designer, a software engineer, and much more. He's the co-author of The Transformable Enterprise, Enterprise Architecture in a New Key, and Prescriptive Analytics, a short introduction to counterintuitive intelligence. Without further ado, let's welcome Noah to Product People. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me here, Asabi.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about ideas. We're going to be talking about the consultant wisdom as I introduced it. So let me start with this. Ideas are all around us. It's a natural thing for humans to have ideas, and kind of reminds me of that scene in the kids' movie Croods, where the dad, Krug, I think, his name says, I have an idea, and it's a big reveal. So now let's say you're talking to a 4-year-old and you're thinking, I want to explain what an idea is. What would you say?
That's a really interesting question. I guess to me, I would really say, if I'm explaining to a 4-year-old, I would leaning towards interpreting, the essence of an idea I would say to a plan. I think in that sense is actually very similar to design, right? An idea is basically a plan where you would try to think about how things would be or what you would do, right, to make it happen, right? So in that sense, it's kind of more like a plan. It's just that in that plan, you have many different aspects, right? Like the what, the why, the how, or when, or where, right? I think all that could go into an idea.
Got you. Okay. That's a very interesting frame. And when you think about ideas, speaking of kids in general, children, I remember one time my son actually had a Lego structure, and I told him, "Oh, well, that's really amazing. That's really great." And he asked me, "Well, what makes it great? I guess I wasn't ready for the follow-up question, but it kind of wants me or prompts me to ask you, what makes for a good idea? What sets apart a great idea from maybe a good one or an average one?
Interesting. Well, I think, yeah, I think this is really, really interesting because I think I'll put it this way, right? As soon as we start answering that question, like what makes for a good idea, or what's the difference between a good one and a great one, right? Or even between a good one and average one. I
Mm-hmm.
think as soon as we start answering those questions, we're actually assuming one thing, right? We're assuming we know whom it's good for, right? I think to me, that's, yeah, like who's the target, right? So then to me, again, we're talking about all those in the context of organizations, right? So in that sense, I would say the answer would have to branch out, right? Based
Mm-hmm.
on whom it's good for and also whom it's great for, right? So, like again, if it's good for employees, then I would assume that it's an idea where if it's implemented, it would actually allow the employees to do the right thing and or do it in the right way, right? So on
Mm-hmm.
top of that, I would also assume that employees are confident that the idea is likely to be adopted by their middle management. I would also assume that they're also confident that they're likely to get the support they need to implement it when it happens, right? So,
Okay.
and then again, furthermore, I would also assume that they're confident that whoever came up with the idea, they get the recognition they deserve, right? And then they're awarded accordingly and fairly, right? So that's, to me, that's the employee's point of view, right? And then also, I would also say there are two more perspectives, right? And then the second one would be if it's good for the middle management, right? Then
Mm-hmm.
the assumption would be that, oh, you know what? It's actually an idea where the middle management are confident that it serves their executives' bottom line really, really well, or that it serves their own bottom line really, really well, right? And that it can be properly implemented by the people at the working level, right? So that's middle management. If it's good for them, I would say, maybe even at least some of those things would be true, right? And then the third perspective would be from an executive's perspective, right? So if it's good for the executives, then I would assume that to them, it's an idea where the executives are confident that it serves their own bottom line really, really well, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe, and that it can also be properly implemented by the people downstream, right? For example, they're confident that, oh, you know what, the management in the middle can just pull this off, right? And then quite sure the working level will figure out how to do it, etc. Right? So then, if we take all that in, I would say here I'm talking kind of like a future lens to the question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because basically we are evaluating the idea at the time of its conception, right? So when we've got an idea, we think about, okay, yeah, is it a good idea? Uh, so it's not at the time of its completion, right? It's not like we already did it and then we reflect, right? So I guess only in that sense, I would say those different perspectives is all about confidence, right? As I said before, right? So it's like, are the employees confident that this is going to be, end up really good, etc. Right? The same goes for the middle
Mm-hmm.
management and executives. So, but then we could also take a past lens to think about it, right? Then maybe the conditions are very similar,
Mm-hmm.
only that we care about whether it actually did what we expected it to do, right? So if we take a kind of like a past
Mm-hmm.
lens, imagine we've done it, right? And then we look back and reflect, was that actually a good idea? So it's now, so in this context, then it's probably not about how confident we are, right? And then, but what, but instead it's more like whether and to what extent it actually make the difference in all the
Mm-hmm.
respective considerations, right? So yeah, then again, I think back to your second half of the question, where how do we like what's the difference between, right, a good idea and a great one? I think there is a major difference,
Mm-hmm.
uh, uh, which is probably, you know, uh, I would put it as it's probably this. It's probably to what extent it aligns different factors or interests, right? So again, in the context of an organization, there were several different parties of interest, right? There's working levels interest, there's middle management's interest, and then there's executives' interest, right? So those are roughly three parties. So it maybe doesn't really matter what those interests are about, right? It could be ethical considerations, it could be career prospects, it could be, organization's future, etc., right? So, but then it also doesn't matter which party holds which type of interest, right? So what really, really matters is how aligned they are, right? So then if we have an idea that serves the executive's interest really well, but it's really, really bad for the employees, for example, right? So if we ask, is that a good idea? Yes, it is. It's just that it's only good to the executives, right? So in that sense, we can say it's a great idea when everything aligns, right? If we have something that it's good for the executives, it's also good for the organization. It's also good for the employees. It's also good for example, the social causes the organization supports, etc., right? So everything aligns pretty well. Then, well, yeah, maybe it's not a good idea. It's a great idea.
Well, okay. There's lots of nuggets there. As I was listening to you, you mentioned a number of things here. First, I think you mentioned the idea of a beneficiary, or who benefits when the idea is executed or is brought to life. You spoke about recognition as well. You spoke about the execution of an idea and how well it's done. You also kind of spoke about the framing or confidence before execution, when the idea is at conception, and also the reflection that might happen upon completion. But I think that the greatest takeaway for me was this factor around alignment. And you mentioned how when moving from good to great, it's not just about a single beneficiary or someone that benefits from, but it's the alignment of multiple levels that would benefit. So that's amazing. I was taking notes as you're speaking because you gave us a lot of nuggets here. Okay, well, I mean, I want to move on to ask you then.
Yeah.
Where do those good ideas come from? Assuming we have some sort of a criteria that you walked us through, and want to better understand, where do you think good ideas come from? Where where do you think the best ideas usually come from?
Very loaded questions. Yeah. So again, I think we're kind of getting to the pattern of this, right? I think where I guess the answer is always it depends, right? And then we need to talk about conditions, right? It's always conditional. So I think to this question here specifically, I would say it really depends on the structure of the organization, right? Or I would say the structure of power specifically, right? So yeah, again, I'm just throwing out frames here, right? So I think my framing of this would be, you know what, if we're talking about the structure of the organization, then there is political structure. It's about what you can influence, right? And then we can also talk about cultural structure, which is about how you can influence under that structure, right? And then we can also have a procedural structure, which is basically, to me, it's kind of like the medium of influence, right? It's how the impact of your influence can materialize, right? And then affect people and things in the organization, right? So we're talking about political structure, cultural structure, and then procedural structure, right? So then if we take that framing as a given, then I can tell you my take on this, right? So then I would say to me, it's interesting, right? So the first point is good ideas come from whoever benefits from them, right? Yeah, because we still have that kind of beneficiary type of issue here, right? And then the second point is that great ideas come from anywhere, right? So that might sound counterintuitive, but yeah, here's my take on that, right? So if we say, well, what if an idea can benefit everyone? If it really does, then it's not a good idea. It's definitely a great idea, right? Because we see, again, we were talking about alignment everywhere, right? And then everybody's happy. It's like win-win-win, right? Kind of thing. So the source of good idea is really coupled with whom it's good for, right? So that's the take on that. And then if you're talking about great ideas, I think it's it's a different case. Great ideas often happen at the intersections of conflicting interests, right? So again, we're talking about alignment here, right? So those intersections of conflicting interests is the only place where alignment can actually happen, right? So where things intersect depends on the structure of the organization and its structure of power, right? So here, I think what I really want to emphasize here is that some organizational structures make it difficult to facilitate and therefore anticipate where those intersections can happen, right? While other structures would actually make it far easier, right? So I remember I once read a book called How to Survive the Organizational Revolution, right? Which is a book actually about organizational structures, right? And then I really want to point that book out because if we think very closely about the structure of an organization, I think we can see where the intersections happen or not happen, right? So I think that gives us clues on where ideas come from.
I wanted to clarify something. You said that when we were talking about the origin of the idea or where does an idea or a good idea come from, you said something about the benefit. You spoke about the beneficiary, and you said that what would make it great is this alignment across different views, and it's great for everyone. Does this mean that a good idea has to be of self-benefit, or is it a single party that benefits from it?
Well, it doesn't have to be, right? It doesn't have to be, right? Because again, I think when we talk about whom it's good for, I think what we didn't talk about is actually there is also a kind of like a power balance there, right? Eventually, what it's good for, different people may have different views on it, right? But if we are to let's say if we are to record the history, right? We want to document how everything is going. Usually, it's the people in power who gets to document it, right? It's not the other way around, right? So then again, I think to me this alignment problem I think it sips into other topics, right? For example, right, if you're talking about alignment, how do we what is the approach that we want to take, right, for us to get, for example, as much alignment as we need, right? Do we take the approach where we just have a very strong leader, where everybody follows, right? And then I don't know, in a sense, maybe it can be a very one-sided unilateral leadership, right? Or it could be highly collaborative. It could be very participatory, where everybody actually contributes to it, right? So then again, there were just many different ways to reach those alignment to the organization.
Fair. Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying. Let me move on to maybe talking about adoption of ideas or being heard, basically, when you have an idea. So do you see that ideas are adopted differently when they come from internal employees versus external consultants? And why that might be the case?
Definitely. I've definitely seen that. But then again, I think I have to admit that I don't have sufficient experience for me to estimate fairly, right? I haven't seen it all. So I think based on my own experience, based on my own exposure to the consulting industry, I definitely can say that it varies wildly depending on the business domains and or sectors, right? And then also it varies wildly, depending on the status of the organization. What I witnessed were occasional cases, right? Occasional, yes, but very alarming nonetheless, right? So, so basically I can tell you I've seen it, right? I've seen it, and it was really, really bad. Right. And as to why, my guess is that it's very coupled with two factors. Right. I think it's coupled with the leader's personal culture, and then I also think it's coupled with the gap in perception. Right. So let's talk about leaders' personal culture first. Right. So a leader who perpetuates in their teams a culture of openness, trust, and democracy would actually tend to attract team members who can thrive in it, right? So then they may get just as many ideas from internal employees, right? If the leader can actually do that, right? But then if you imagine if it's a very toxic culture where it becomes pathetic and limiting, then, exactly because few employees would actually dare to or bother to contribute ideas, then as a result, from the leader's point of view, they just don't have that many choices, right? Their only source of ideas would have to be external consultants. But that's because their internal employees just wouldn't bother to do it, right? Whether they like it or not. So, to those leaders, they are just like they cannot get it from internal employees, and therefore, right, external sources, are their only sources, right? So I'm not even sure they have a choice in this case. Then, and then there's a gap of perception, right? I think, to me, that's actually a even more critical issue here. So I think what I'm seeing is that external consultants may spend really big time selling themselves, right? They'll say, hey, we're the expert in this and that, right? We can help you, right? But then they're selling their expertise and experience and reputations and prestige, right? So that's how the consulting market works, right? It should work that way, right? Everybody trying to just sell their self, right? And then therefore they can get their work done. So similarly, I think ambitious and politically capable employees may do something similar, right? So if you're an internal employee, you're ambitious, you're really capable politically, right? You can, sell yourself, right? You can do all those different things exactly as the consultants do, right? But then the thing is this, right? The thing is, I bet most employees wouldn't be able to or wouldn't want to even, right? So then if we take that as a context, then guess who does the selling just as much as external consultants, right, in the organization, right? Actually, it's the middle management and the senior management, right? It's actually the management who does just as much selling as the external consultants. So we end up with a situation here where external consultants get to sell themselves to the management, right? While the working level employees barely do so, right? And those who end up in the management, and those who actually end up in the management, actually, at least is partially because they do their own selling really, really well, right? So so then to me, it's kind of like to me that's why I think I call it a gap in perception, right? We basically just perceive things differently, and then to the management, the external consultants are the ones who are selling themselves, right? But then much less so, when they think about employees, right? And then to the organization internally, those who sell themselves really, really well gets into the management, right? So they just have a very different perceptions to the management. What they see is either themselves and the external consultant. They just don't see the employees there.
That's very interesting. So I noticed you mentioned, the two factors that you spoke about, whether it's the culture that may result in basically no not a lot of ideas or not a lot of options internally. As such, the only option is to go external. Then on the second one, when you spoke about the gap of perception, it seems to me like what you were really talking about was selling and marketing capabilities and where they live, and being a full-time or being an internal employee as an individual contributor for the most part, there isn't a lot of maybe appetite or interest to develop such skills or maybe capacity and time.
Yeah.
But what I found very interesting is you didn't really speak about the merit. So the merit of the idea might not be, it might be the same exact idea in both cases, but these are the factors that actually maybe influence such perception. So I wanted to kind of ask you then, if in your experience, when that happens, what are some of the potential repercussions or consequences of consistently overlooking these ideas? So assume they're coming from internal employees. Maybe they're not sold at the same level or with the same energy that would come from external consultants. But I want to understand, assuming this is happening for a long period of time, what are some of these repercussions, and how might this affect things like, employee engagement and overall innovation within a company?
I think to me it's very obvious that if that really happened, then the management would actually overlook ideas from internal employees, right? But then I guess here's a really, I don't know, maybe I would just call it very sad situation here, because basically it's the management who overlook ideas from internal employees. They are probably the people who suffer nothing, right? But then what really suffers is the working level employees, right? They may become really discouraged. They may even become disenfranchised, right? And then in the long run, I think if you take that into account, that would be, it's actually the organization, right? The organization actually hurts the most.
Yeah, I mean, I've personally heard the story a lot around individuals where they were in a situation like this. It was, they're not listening to me, basically. It's people are not listening to me. I presented this to leadership. As a result, the conclusion or the course of action is, I'm going to go external. And funny enough, in a lot of cases, that's what happens. People go to agencies, people go to consulting companies, and they thrive. They do very well because not because they're changing the way of thinking or making it better, just because they changed the position within the game and they became an external versus an internal. So it's a very interesting phenomenon for sure. Let me ask you this then. When you think about advice, so let's give some concrete advice first to companies. What advice do you have for companies to value and use their employees' insights and ideas effectively?
Interesting question. So, I guess to me, okay, I think to this, well, I do think it's probably mostly from a leader's point of view, right? I think as a leader, you want to become the leader who values and uses your employees' insights and ideas, right? And even when it's not so effective, I would say, right? I think we talk about how do we do this effectively, right? And then I think I also often talk about always like effectively and efficiently, right? But then I guess to the leaders, I think it's really like, okay, you know what? Even if it's not as effective and not as efficient, you should still try to do it, right? Because you're not just aiming for the short term, right? You're aiming for the long term. You want to establish this as part of your culture, right? And then, so to me, it's like, okay, at least you need to try, right? You need to start trying like right now at the very least, right? So I think, again, we talk about like things like leadership and culture and all that. It sounds very easy, but it's really not, right? Because, if you're a leader in a company, it's one thing for you to think that you value and use your employees' insights and ideas, right? But it's quite another thing for those employees to believe that you do and have the confidence that you're going to continue to do so, right? So that's very different. It's, again, I would say that's also a gap of perception, right? You perceive yourself as a leader to be doing all the right things, while the employees might not, right? So I don't think that's a skill about taking ideas per se, right? I think that's a skill about good leadership. And then again, on the general note, I think I cannot emphasize more the notion that being a good leader is just a higher bar for being human, right? So more often than not, you actually, you take care of people, and trust will take care of itself, right? And then on the same note, I would say you take care of expertise and ideas and all that, right? And then the ideas will take care of themselves effectively and efficiently.
I see. Okay, that was very profound. It sounded quite poetic to me, especially the part where you said how being a great leader affects and reflects on being also a great human. Rephrasing here, of course, but I think that was that was very well put. But if I think about the people listening to this and people that I would say are more of, let's call them the product people that are building products day in, services, what advice would you have to them, especially if they feel that their ideas are not heard by senior management or leadership in their companies?
Yeah, it's hard, I guess. First thing, it's hard. And then, yeah, again, I think there are two sides of this, right? And then I think one side is to, you need to assess yourself, right? And then I always consider myself as part of those employees who find it really, really frustrating, right? So this is also advice to myself, right? I think it's like, you need to assess yourself, right? You need to ask, do I have the skills to gain trust, to gain influence, and then to influence others and eventually communicate my ideas at the right place, at the right time, and to the right people, right? Do I have those skills, right? And then I think you can assess it by asking for feedback from others, right? You can ask your managers, and ask for their feedback. You can ask your colleagues to help you, right? You can ask your team members who report to you, right? If you're a team leader, let's say, right? And that you need to get the feedback you need so that you can assess where you are in terms of those skills, right? I would say sometimes people call it's kind of like a social skill, or even in the organization, it's kind of like a political skill, right? Then you need to assess where you are, right? How good are you, right? In gaining trust, right? And in influencing others, right? And then all that, right? Sometimes it's called politicking, right? So to me, that's one side, right? Where you are, what do you need to learn, right? To be able to do that in any organization. That's one thing. And then the other side, right? I think it's to assess your senior management, right? So yeah, because if you say, oh, you really want to propose good ideas, you want to influence senior management, right? By getting your ideas through, then you need to do your research on them, right? You need to try to understand why they failed to take your ideas previously, right? How they perceived and how they received your ideas previously, right? And then also, what are the incentives that they might have for taking or not taking your ideas, right? Then again, I would say it's really just, well, if it happened before, you're frustrated, you would want to, you actually would want to try to figure out why, right? Through your own research, right? And then again, I think as product people, we may pride ourselves as having the technical rigor in our products, right? We have all those wonderful expertises in building products and all that, right? But then Do we need the same technical rigor in our people and teams and organizations? I think my answer would be yes, we do. Right? We do need the same technical rigor in dealing with those things.
This was really, really helpful. Thank you, Noah. I wrote down self-reflection as the first piece of advice for product people on making their ideas heard. I also put down seeking advice and feedback internally. So you can kind of uncover some of those blind spots, but building and improving your social and political skills as well. And then finally, studying and assessing and researching your idea receiver in a way, the senior management, the people that you're presenting, your investors in an indirect way, the people that will invest in that idea that you're proposing. And I find all of these quite intriguing and useful and actionable. So I think I want to maybe end on this. I'm sure a lot of people listening are going to find your insights very helpful, but I wanted to ask you, how can people learn more about your work and connect with you?
So again, if you're interested, and then you can actually go to my website, right? And then I'm constantly on LinkedIn and all those other social media, right? So it's actually very easy to find me online. And then, again, always happy to chat about all those things.
Awesome. I'll include some of your social links as part of this episode. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for being with us today and appreciate all your insights.
Thank you very much for having me here.
A heartfelt thank you to our incredible guest, Noah Fang, for sharing his very valuable insights on the consultant wisdom as an organizational social pattern. We've delved deep into where ideas come from, what makes for good and great ideas, and how you can better sell your ideas to others. I found Noah's insights thought-provoking and actionable, and I hope you did too. I want to express my gratitude to all our listeners. Your support means the world to me. If you found today's episode valuable, please hit the subscribe button, leave a review, or share this podcast with your friends. I also encourage you to share your feedback and your ideas on what topics you'd like to hear about next on this podcast. Your input is very important as it helps me learn and improve. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes, and until next time, stay courageous, creative, and compassionate. Take care.